Hello, BookTube. I have a strange little video here. It doesn't have to last long, but it's been mentioned in my emails. I leave my email on every video. That is not a joke. That is not directed you to my merch store. That is not a terrified third cousin once removed who's handling those things and funneling up the super chats to me. That's my email. And I encourage you to write to me about anything at any time. I'm a lonely old shut-in. I can always use the mail. The only thing that uh, the only cautions that I would give, basically the main ones, are twofold. Number one is most of you get it anyway, which is that you have to be a little patient. I talk about being a lonely old shut-in, but I'm actually fairly busy. Uh, and even though I put on pants, I'm fairly busy, and that means I get hundreds of emails a day. I've mentioned to a lot of you when you come here to visit for wine and calzones. I've also mentioned it on this channel from time to time in an offhand way. I've never put a stress on it, but people have noticed it. People have asked me about it. I've often mentioned that one of the things I do in the morning is the overnight emails. And I've had people comment over the years saying, you're the only person I know who talks about doing emails like it was some sort of task. Well, it's a large task. It's a lot of email. And I'm sure that I miss a lot of them too. And so one of the stipulations for emailing me is that you have to be aware of that. And most of you are. Most of you have a very good sense of that. That if you write me, for instance, a 5,000 word dissertation, I'm not going to write back. I'm not going to respond at all. And if you write me a quick friendly email, hey, did you see this? Or hey, have you heard of this? Or whatnot? Or even hey, this is really bothering me. Can I talk about it a bit? It doesn't have to be one sentence, but as long as it's not a dissertation. That if you write me an email like that, you might not get an immediate response. It might not, you shouldn't be constantly refreshing your email. It might be a day before I get to you. Most of you understand that. Most of you are totally okay with that limitation. Of course, the other limitation on my email is something that people are either going to do or they're not going to do. There's no real way to talk about it. Obviously, when I say I leave my email on every video, you're welcome to email me about anything. Doesn't have to be about books. It can be about anything. You can email me about anything, but there are some things that are not going to be appreciated at all. Emailing me to pick a fight with me when you're not a friend of mine, or when you're not doing it in a friendly way. You don't have to be, I have a very elastic idea of what it is to be a friend of mine, right? Because I'm on BookTube. And I consider a lot of the people on BookTube to be friends of mine, even though we've never met, never even conversed in private. Still, you get a sense for people. You want to email me there and say, well, what's an example? Not to name names, but to date this video. Well, Kevin Toll Reads, brand new BookTube channel. Never been here for wine and calzones. I don't think we've ever communicated in private. Get the sense from our two video channels and the interactions that we've had in comments and whatnot. I think we get the sense that we kind of like each other. If he wrote me an email tomorrow and said, I fundamentally disagree with something that you said in your video yesterday, and here's why. I won't write a dissertation about it, but here's why. I'd love for you to go into a little depth with this on me. Maybe detail this for me, or is it possible that you're wrong? I love those kinds of emails, provided they're done in that way. I love them. I get plenty of emails that aren't done in that way. I get plenty of emails that are basically scolding me. The reason that, if any of the writers of those emails are wondering, the reason you don't get a response is because I'm a lot older than you are. And I am not here to be scolded by you or anybody. And along those same lines would be the passive aggressive people, the ones who write a piteous woe is me email and then finish up by saying no need to respond. I always chuckle, no matter how serious the subject of the email is, I always chuckle a little when I get those. I was raised by a Boston Irish Catholic mother. Okay, unless you were raised by an actual Jewish mother, that's as Olympic level guilt inducing as it gets. Okay, I'm still the silver in the Olympics guilt inducing level. You finishing off an email with no need to respond is piker. It's not even going to dent me. So if you're trying, and a lot of these passive aggressive people are trying to make me feel guilty for not responding at long length, you're in the piker leagues. I was acclimated to guilt long before you were born by someone who was a Herbert von Karajan master at the art. So don't bother. Those sorts of emails and the fight picking ones, of course, are the exception. But most of the time, I'm happy to get emails from people. And I've got a lot of emails in the last 4 or 5 days. about the same thing. People wanting to know if I would talk about the same thing. And I responded to a whole bunch of you. I'm sure a lot of you, I know one of you at least is watching now. And my response was always a kind of reflexive, well, but I'd like to keep the focus in my channel on books. Maybe in the live stream, not so much. But this is not a movie criticism channel. This is not a TV criticism channel. I could easily make such a channel. It'd be a lot of fun. But then a lot of you were persistent. You were saying, you know, I've got relatives who are watching this thing and loving it, and I know you don't love it, and I wish I knew your reasons for it so I could maybe talk to them about it a little. And then yesterday, one of you actually pointed out, one of you have been having a back and forth. One of you has been doing exactly what I was talking about, just disagreeing with me. Well, no, I think you're wrong about that. Of course you can talk about it. That kind of stuff I love. Absolutely love, despite the fact that I am a wavy-haired, sexy 8-pack influencer dictatorially running a massive runaway success YouTube channel. I do still want to occasionally be called on my fallacies. If I wear a children's cartoon jumpsuit to take people to a dead body hanging in a Japanese forest, I want you to call me on it. This video is going off the rails already. One of you made the point that this person who's been not leaving me alone in the subject in a wonderful way, I'm perfectly up for that. And plus, a lot of you have learned that if you think maybe your email is a little bit of an ask, you can grease the wheels with a dog picture. I should never have said that. I should never have let that go. One of you finally made the point yesterday that finally got through to me and said, well, the whole thing's about a book. And I can't really deny that. So I want to make a brief video in response to this new Christian propaganda movie, The Ark and the Darkness. If you watch any Christian channels on YouTube, a lot of them are talking about it, they're raving about it, because the cinematics in it are wonderful. It's just a beautiful thing to look at. As far away from the old claymation Davy and Goliath as is possible to imagine. And also, I don't know if you watch Christian debunking channels, I know there are some of those still in the wake of so-called new atheism. I'm sure that all of them are taking a bite at the apple of this thing too. And a number of you correctly guessed that I would have got a screener for it and that I probably watched it. And I did get a screener for it and I did watch it. It purports to be a documentary, but it's not a documentary. It's just a movie. You can't have a documentary about an imaginary thing. And you also can't have a documentary that's done by zealots. Right? A documentary, freighted in that word is that it will be a dispassionate examination of a subject. And if you're a zealot, you're not dispassionately examining a subject. And in the first 6 seconds of The Ark and the Darkness, we are told that this thing is made by zealots. And how? You only have to listen for one word. Evidences. The word evidences occurs in the first 6 seconds of the movie. Evidence in English is a plural verb. It's a plural noun. Evidence is plural. It encompasses everything. The only people, and I mean the only people, anywhere in the world who use evidence plural, evidences, are nutjob, young earth, flat earth, creationist Christians. And they use it by force. They use it as dogma. They use it because their church leaders, their pastors, and their spiritual followers will notice if they don't use it and correct them. And so it has become dogma with them. They are a dogma crowd anyway. So if you hear that, well, I don't know if Christians still debate Christian debunkers. That was all the rage 15 years ago. I don't know if that still happens. But if it does, I would really like to hope that the Christian debunker would stop the whole debate and say, well, my opponent is misusing a word in English. So before I move on to any counterpoints, I thought I would correct him. There is no such word as evidences. The word is evidence. It is a plural word in English. So now that we've cleared that up, I'll go on to my comments. And then, because it's dogmatically dictated, that in the next round, the Christian apologist is going to use the word evidences. And the debunker ought to say, well, as I said in my previous speaking turn, my opponent is misusing the English language. I have now pointed this out to him and he's still doing it, which means he doesn't care what's right or wrong. I know that it's a trivial thing, but it gives the whole game away. And The Ark and the Darkness is about Noah's Ark. I'm sorry. It's hard for me not to laugh. This is about Noah's Ark. It's about the Great Flood. And I shouldn't laugh, because in my reviewing life in the last 20 years, I have had many editors get back to me in response to some comment that I made in a piece in which I refer to the obvious mythology of Noah's Ark, with an editorial comment, sometimes on a shared document so the office can see it, asking, you got any proof that Noah's Ark is mythology? Noah's Ark? I mean, come on. Why are you saying this is mythological? Is that some sort of fringe idea? You wouldn't believe how many times I have got that in the last 20 years. An obvious piece of mythology. An 800-year-old man gathering polar bears onto a wooden boat to save himself from a flood that covers the whole world. It's an obvious piece of mythology. I've had editors who just don't even think about it. Secular editors who say, got any proof that Noah's Ark didn't happen? I thought they found it on a mountain in Turkey. So I shouldn't laugh, because it's serious. There are a whole bunch of people in the world, in America, who believe that this really happened and want it taught in schools and want biology to be based on it. And that's what this is. This movie purports to be a documentary about all the evidence that we have for the fact that Noah's flood really happened. And a lot of you have watched it. A lot of you have seen it in your church services. It's now free on YouTube, so it's being shown in churches all over the world. Or I should say all over the world. The world is either Muslim or atheist. It's all over America, the United States. Backward, science-denying, flat earth, fundamentalist Christian world. It's a lot of you have seen this. You've been shown it. Your kids have been shown it. And you've been asking. And the key thing, number one thing we should start with, of course, here, and I'm preaching to the choir here, no pun intended, is that this didn't happen. Of course, this is obvious mythology. This is an obvious mythology story. One family gathering all the animals of the world together onto one boat that survives on the open ocean for a year while all the rest of the world is drowned. One mighty elf lord in an excess of rage, charging all the way to the gates of Morgoth and facing him in single combat, and one time after another, Morgoth's mace blasts a hole in the ground itself, and finally the elf falls in a valiant effort. Do I need to describe these things and then clarify that they're made up? I don't think I do. But nevertheless, we should start that way. This is false. This is obvious mythology. The record-keeping kingdoms of Korea, ancient Egypt, ancient China, did not notice that they were underwater for a year. They weren't underwater for a year. This is obvious mythology. So we could start with that. But the main point that I want to make about the Ark and the Darkness is not about the movie, because you can't assemble evidence to prove a fantasy. This obviously didn't happen. It obviously didn't happen. The very idea is ridiculous. The minute you start picking at the ways that it couldn't happen, you are losing. But talking about Noah's flood just in general is losing. And that's the main point that I want to make about the Ark and the Darkness. It's not about whether or not Noah's flood happened, whether or not 2 polar bears started the 5-year-long trek on foot to get to Judea to get on the Ark. Whether or not, what about the hibernating animals? They would have needed 10 years to get to Judea. I'm not talking about that, because the minute you start talking about the logistics of it, you've lost. The point that I want to make here is that the thing to watch for are the presuppositions that Christianity smuggles into literally everything it does. It's intentional, it's institutional, and boy, oh boy, have they got it down to a fine art. You have to be paying extra close attention to make sure that some Christian claim does not have all sorts of other Christian claims smuggled in. If a Christian says, well, I'm willing to debate the young earth, whether or not Earth is young, or whether or not whether it was created by natural forces or it was created by God, I'm willing to debate that. They've smuggled in their God. You're already agreeing that their God, as opposed to 50,000 other gods, is the God we're talking about. They're not talking about Odin or Shango. They're talking about their God, and they've smuggled it in, and they are so good at doing that. So good at getting you to argue on their turf, when that's not how arguments should work. That's not how debate works. That's not how disagreement works. You don't cede points, especially if you disagree with every single point. And that's what's happening with the Ark and the Darkness. And that's what I imagine is happening on all of the refutation videos that I imagine are out there, talking about how the geological record says there couldn't possibly have been a flood that covered the whole world. There we have records of civilizations that were alive and high and dry that whole time. Their records are unbroken. There wasn't a worldwide flood. Humans did not live with dinosaurs, which would necessarily be true, but wasn't true 200 years ago. 200 years ago, the same flat earth science deniers were saying the flood happened, period, because they didn't know about dinosaurs. Once dinosaurs became an irrefutable fact, well, then we've got to deal with them. You can't tell the public that dinosaurs don't exist, unless you're Eric Dubay. So you've got to tell them that dinosaurs, you've got to fold them into your mythology somehow. Ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. A whole bunch of dinosaur species were too big to fit, even one individual on Noah's Ark, and a whole bunch more of them were ruthless carnivores. Indisputable from the fossil evidence. They were ruthless carnivores. So if you want them to somehow be around with humans, it doesn't work. And the minute you start arguing about that, you're agreeing with more than you're disagreeing from the anti-science flat earth Christian. You don't want to agree with anything that they're saying. You don't want to give them any ground. You don't want to cede them any presuppositions. And I imagine that the people who are debunking the Ark and the Darkness on YouTube are granting a lot of those presuppositions. And the number one presupposition, the number one thing that Christians will smuggle in about the Great Flood is that it happened 6,000 years ago. That's the term that they'll use. The earth is 6,000 years old, and the flood happened 4,000 years ago. So Adam and Eve were created 6,000 years ago, and then 4,000 years ago, thereabouts, they'll always add something like that, like they're carefully calibrating. The thereabouts, 4,000 years ago, God looked upon human beings, saw that they were all wicked, even the infants, even the toddlers, even the babies in their mother's wombs, that all of them were wicked. All of them were. And that he's going to wipe them all out except for one family. One old man who's judged the best of his generation, even though everything that we learn from him in this mythological story is horrible. He's a horrible person. And his family, his wife, who's not named, and their children and their wives. And that's it. And everyone else dies in this mythology, in this bit of mythology. Everything else that's alive dies, that lives on land. All the turtles, all the sloths, all the lions, all the elephants, all the little children running around. Look out your window. Down the street. Look at the little children running around. Are they wicked in their heart? Are they evil to their uttermost atom? No, they aren't. The babies in their mother's wombs, are they evil? No, they aren't. They can't be. They all die. They all die anyway. They'll die a horrible death of drowning. In order to get to that, you have to agree with a Christian presupposition. And it's an absurd one. So the minute you start talking about this event that happened 4,000 years ago, why are you talking about that? Why are you talking about 4,000 years ago instead of 40,000 years ago or 400,000 years ago? Because of a guy named Bishop Usher, who looked at the events in his Bible and decided to start calculating them in the flyleaf of his Bible, started to do marginalia about how many years are we talking about here? Well, it's easy. You take the time of recorded history. Pontius Pilate, we know when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea. We know when Caesar Augustus was on the throne at Rome. Take the time of recorded history in the Bible and count backwards. Count backwards through the generations. And then just keep going. Keep counting backwards through the generations. A lot of the most tedious parts of the Old Testament are just generations. Just keep counting backwards. And eventually you'll get to Noah, and then beyond him, you'll get to Adam. And through these calculations that he did, not on the back of an envelope, but close enough, Bishop Usher came to a calculation that the earth is about 6,000 years old and that the flood happened about 4,000 years ago. And if you use that framework, You're already being a Christian. You're already doing their work for them. They are very, very good at slipping in presuppositions. And the presupposition there is that it's a number. And numbers can't be doubted. Of course it can be doubted. Bishop Usher is using lifespans that are centuries long. Humans don't live that long. Humans don't live for 400 years. They don't live for 600 years. They don't live way up there with Methuselah and Noah at 800 and 900 years. Humans don't live that long. The only reason you would include that calculation in if you're Bishop Usher is because you are working in the presupposition that anything in the Bible must be true. The Bible's full of mythology. Nothing in it is true. So if you take that away, well, then you don't have Bishop Usher anymore. And so you don't have a time frame anymore. And without a time frame, you're obviously talking about mythology. So the thing is rotten from its beginning. Bishop Usher is using mythological lifespans. And he's doing that because he is smuggling in the inerrancy of Christian dogma. But Christian dogma is no more inerrant than any other dogma. None of this stuff is real. None of it can be shown or proven or demonstrated or replicated in any way. And plenty of it can be disproven. We have a fossil record. You can't put things in rocks 100 miles down in a quarry. You can't do that. No human can do that. We have a fossil record. It clearly shows there was no global flood. Ever. At least not in the length of time that fossils were recorded, and they go back a long way. There was no global flood. There was certainly no global flood 4,000 years ago. We have all sorts of human records and remains that go back further than that would not if it existed. There's no point in arguing about it, but there's especially no point in arguing about it because the minute you use that time frame, you're already using a Christian time frame. They have already slipped that past you. You must not let them slip anything past you. This is obvious mythology. 2 of every animal. 7 of the clean, and ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. These are canonical numbers of great numerological significance taken from Old Testament scripture. The whole thing is a written construct. It's a myth the same as anything that you would make up on your own. And if you take away all the Christian presupposition, all of it, so how do you know that this was 4,000 years ago? Because Bishop Usher calculated it. He calculated it on the basis of people being 400 years old. People don't get to be 400 years old. He calculated wrong. So that's gone. When you take away all of that, what you're left with here is just propaganda. This is just propaganda. And it's propaganda with a purpose. It isn't the Ark and the Darkness doesn't just want you to think that Noah's flood really happened. Noah's flood no more happened than Pegasus really happened. It's obvious mythology. But their goal is not just to convince you that Noah's flood happened. It's to convince your school board that Noah's flood happened. This is Seven Mountains Dominionism. They want to control schools. They want this taught as fact in schools. Something that is obviously not fact. That is part of their faith. And why? Because you should be part of their faith. And so should your kids. That's evil. That's really, really evil. So on its surface, benignly, the Ark and the Darkness is a fun watch. But all of its underpinnings are both fraudulent in that they smuggle in all the Christian presuppositions that you need to make the whole thing go, to make it not mythology. It's obvious mythology, Romulus and Remus mythology. So, and the only reason that it ever sounds like it's not is all of these fraudulent numbers by Bishop Usher. Not only is it fraudulent, but it's nefarious. It wants to be curriculum, not entertainment. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on the Ark and the Darkness. It is junk. It's very visually appealing. I actually unironically applaud the people who made it. They did a really good job. They enlisted their talents in the service of evil, but the result is very beautiful to look at. Ridiculous, of course. It's ridiculous. Carnivorous dinosaurs do not eat watermelons. They do not eat vegetables. They do not live peacefully with human beings. It's just ridiculous. Just ridiculous. An Allosaurus, a big predatory tyrannosaur, would kill an adult human instantly. I'm not talking about what kind of a fight it would be. I'm saying they wouldn't even need to be hungry. An adult human has no skin, No hide, no armor, no hair, no camouflage abilities, no nails, no teeth, no muscles, no reflexes, no speed, no sensory apparatus, no nothing. You're basically a big fetus with an incredibly powerful brain. That's basically what you are. A tyrannosaurid walking down the street would kill and eat you easily, would do it just because you're an obviously easy meal. They obviously did not live with humans. anyway, you see, I'm already engaging in ground that you should not seed. None of this is real. The minute you get me talking about any of it as if it were, even if I'm vociferously debating that it's real, I'm still debating your reality. Why? Why should I? Why should we be debating this reality as opposed to a great cow creating humans by licking them out of salt? Why aren't we talking about that? Well, because the Christian presupposition that I worked in before we even started talking is, of course, this is the only real religion. No, you've got to prove it all, and you can't prove any of it. So that's my reaction to the Ark and the Darkness. It's entertaining to watch, but watch with your guard up, and I would say watch without children. Or be prepared to answer their questions, and make sure that you answer their questions, that this didn't happen. This is obvious mythology. Anyway, we won't make a habit of this, but enough of you were asking, one in particular being very persistent about it, and I thought that I would at least mention it. Those are my thoughts on the Ark and the Darkness, which you can watch. I'm pretty sure you can watch it on YouTube for free. So go right ahead and do so, but don't be fooled. But anyway, I'll go back to books and I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.